I'm here at the Specials Day at Burford in Oxfordshire today with Tony Thorpe, who has this extremely unusual Falcon Peregrine. I've never seen one before. Why?
Because as far as we know, this is the only one in the UK. So this was made by the Falcon company that made a number, not a lot, of different body shells. And this was about the fifth one they made. It was launched at the 1961 racing car show, and this was the actual car on the stand at the 61 racing car show.
And was this their first model?
No, this was, as I say, their fifth model.
Right.
For Falcon.
Oh, okay. So when did Falcon launch?
Falcon
when did they arrive?
Started about 1956-57.
Okay.
So it was formed by a man called Peter Pellandine, who had been an apprentice at Mulliner in London as a stylist. He then joined forces with a guy called Keith Waddington, and they made Ashley cars, and some of the Ashleys are here today.
Yes.
In about 1957-58, they split up. Peter Pellandine went on to form Falcon cars, and Keith Waddington carried on making Ashleys.
Right.
So the start of Falcon is really 1956-57, but Peter Pellandine was making fiberglass cars before that. He started off with something called the Falcon 750, which was based on an Austin 7 chassis. He then moved on to something called the Falcon Mark II, which was a sort of almost like a D-type Jag type shape, very nice, very sought after now. Then the Caribbean, then this and another one called the Bermuda were launched in 1961. And then finally there was a Falcon called a 515, which was made in 1962-63, but that wasn't Peter Pellandine who made that. Peter Pellandine had a car accident in about the end of 1961-62. It put him in hospital for a long time, and his company went bust while he was in hospital. So when he came out, he sold up and moved to Australia.
Okay.
Where many years later he was attempting to break the world steam speed record, and I saw him as a kid on Tomorrow's World with these steam powered cars, not knowing that one day I'd own this.
So how successful was Falcon in its day? Did they sell many kits? They were all kits, presumably.
This was sold as a complete car, so this was their first foray into making a complete car, and this was quite expensive in 1961. It was about 1,500 quid, which in
that's E-Type money.
E-Type was 1,900 quid, I think. It came out a little bit later. So yeah, it was a very expensive car, and it was designed as a car that you could drive to the track, you could race it, and then drive home. That was the idea. Unfortunately, it was stillborn because of the accident that he had. So you asked me how many there are. There is this one. We know of one other that was raced in Holland for quite a while, and then went on to Germany and hasn't been seen since. And there is sort of the possibility of a third, but we've never found that. So as far as at the moment, this is the only one.
And that's in terms of survivors.
No, that was in
terms of how they were made.
All the ones that were made.
So only three.
Only three.
Okay, and possibly only two.
Possibly only two.
Okay.
If you read the Peter Philby book, Specialist Sports Cars, he claims two. All right.
But I know from below the radar that finding definitive production numbers for anything is hopeless.
So if you look at the Turner cars, they're really good because Jack Turner kept meticulous records of all the chassis numbers, and they've all got chassis numbers. These don't. So, as you say, trying to work out what the production figures are is really, really difficult. So the most popular model was the Caribbean, and sort of between 200 and 400 kits were sold, and they're still the one that crop up most now. They're sort of readily available. The 750s were made exactly the same as the Ashley 750.
Right.
So if you buy an Ashley or a Falcon 750, you don't know which one it is, because that's the moulds that Peter Pellandine took with him when the company split, and both companies made that model.
Right, okay.
The Mark IIs, again, there are a number of them around, but again, they seem to be very popular in places like Italy and Germany, so they've been snapped up in those places.
And what mechanicals does it use? What's under the bonnet?
So under the bonnet of this at the moment is a 1600 cross-flow Ford engine. Originally it had a Cosworth Anglia engine. So it had a 997 Anglia engine that was breathed on by Cosworth.
Especially for Falcon, they bought those engines in.
Yes, so I think it was this and the Tornado Typhoon were the first cars outside Lotus that had a Cotswold engine. The engine out of this is quite interesting. So the chairman of the Fairthorpe Sports Car Club a few years ago, sadly he's passed away now, John Allen, who was a racer back in the 60s, bought the engine out of this car. He saw it for sale in Motoring News when Peter Pellandine was selling up and going to Australia. He needed a race engine for his Fairthorpe, and he told me the story of driving up to Essex, because these were made in Waltham Abbey, buying the engine out of this car, putting it in his Fairthorpe, and he said he won loads of races with that particular engine. So when I got it, it had an engine, it had this 1600 Ford engine. I've got an Anglia engine, but I just haven't got round to putting it in.
And how long have you owned the car?
I've owned it almost 30 years.
Okay, and what state was it in when you bought it?
It was a bit of a wreck, to be honest. It mechanically it sort of worked, but the bodywork was atrocious, and it was in a poor way. And I was fortunate enough to find a really good fiberglass guy called Dave Rose just outside Melton Mowbray, and he did the bodywork for me. And to be honest, you know, we had no knowledge of what should fit where. So for example, there was no dashboard in it, so that's actually a Lotus Elite dashboard, simply because it fitted the space.
Certainly looks good. It looks like it was made to be there.
Well, of course, it's of the same vintage. You know, the Lotus Elite came out in '57, so you know it's contemporary to the car, and it just happened to fit. So that's what we put in it.
And this is a converter with a hardtop on, isn't it?
It is.
It's
so
on
the
a fixed
hardtop
head.
comes up. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you just remove this bit of plaster here and it flies off.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. It's a bit loose, so that's just a bit of security on
and that's clipped into place with over clips. So okay. So anything still to do on it, or is it all done after 30 years?
There's always things to do on it.
Yeah. Well, put the an Anglia engine.
An Anglia engine would be nice. It's got a bit of bump steer, so we need to because this was the sole prototype. I think they were trying different things, and not all of it works. So the front suspension geometry is not quite sorted, and so actually we spent yesterday playing with it, trying to get it a little bit better, and so there's a bit more work to do on that. So it's a space frame chassis. There are different stories about who designed the space frame. One of them is that it was designed by Len Terry, who was a designer for Lotus, of course, and went on to design the cars for Eagle. But he was asked about it and he denied all knowledge of it. And he said it's based on a Terrier Mark II chassis, which actually he didn't design. Right. So he must have sold the Terrier project. But it's a sort of a space frame chassis. The rear suspension is very much like a Lotus 11. So so it's got some pedigree. But of course, at that time, all those companies like Ginetta, like Marcos, Falcon, Fairthorpe, they were all trying to get find out what was best and what worked well, both on the road and on the track. A
lot of them were basically offering fresh bodies for pre-war cars.
So
especially Fords.
Originally that's exactly how Falcon started. They were basically a kit car manufacturer, as we would call them. So they were selling sexy looking fiberglass bodies that would fit on a pre-war chassis, either an Austin 7 or a Ford Pop. But by the time they got to this car, they were, I think, looking forward and looking to make fully built cars that worked better than a nice body just on an old chassis. And so that's why you've got the space frame, why you've got the sort of a little bit more sophisticated rear suspension and a bit more sophisticated front suspension, even though it doesn't quite work yet.
Maybe one day, once you've ironed out those development niggles after 70 years or whatever,
maybe.
Since the car was first built.
It's a lifetime project.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks. Look forward to seeing it when you've got the Anglia engine in, but it looks a fantastic project.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for talking to me.
Thank you.